we will do what is right.
At the same time, the chief executive is also moving to reorganize the Sugar Regulatory Administration. That's after some of its officials involved in the controversial order resigned in the past few days. Once the overhaul is complete, the president will also conduct an inventory of sugar supply in the country with the help of stakeholders.
Kung ano yung meron, kung ano yung available, mailabas na sa merkado. And yung kulang, kunin na natin, mag-import na tayo. Mapipilitan talaga tayo. Unfortunately, it's the same situation in all the agricultural commodities in the Philippines. Ayaw natin mag-import hanggat maaari. Ngunit, ang problema, hindi sapat yung production natin. At kuminsan yung presyo pati ay napakataas.
President Marcos also vows to negotiate with traders to lower the price of refined sugar, the kind that households usually use. Agriculture Department data says that as of Wednesday, a kilo of refined sugar in Metro Manila is at 100 pesos, 75 pesos for washed sugar, 70 for brown sugar.
They first offered at 80 pesos. So sabi ko, hingin ko ng 70 pesos, tulungan nyo na lang kasi kawawa naman ng tao. And we're getting there.
Rex Remitio, CNN Philippines.
Beverage manufacturers confirm they're dealing with a shortage in premium refined sugar, a key ingredient in many of their products. In a joint statement, Coca-Cola Beverages Philippines, Pepsi-Cola Products Philippines, and ARC Refreshment said they're working closely with government and other stakeholders to address the situation. The statement comes as Malacanang and lawmakers look into the botched plan to import 300 metric tons of sugar. Ahead of its first investigation under the 19th Congress, the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee engages two former officials of the Office of the Ombudsman to show what it calls is its seriousness in investigating alleged irregularities in government. In an organizational meeting on Wednesday, Committee Chairman Francis Tolentino announced former overall Deputy Ombudsman Melchor Carandang will be the panel's senior legal consultant. Carandang made headlines during the previous administration after leading the probe into then-President Rodrigo Duterte's alleged ill-gotten wealth. Carandang was dismissed from his post in 2018. Meanwhile, former Deputy Ombudsman for Luzon, Gerard Mosquera, took his oath of office as General Counsel of the committee. Mosquera also previously served as Chairman of the Presidential Commission on Good Government, an agency tasked to recover the ill-gotten wealth of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos and his allies. Just 5 days to go before students return to classrooms, the Metro Manila Development Authority goes after illegally parked vehicles along what's known as the University Belt area in Manila. Authorities found out some bike lanes have been turned into pay parking areas. George Quiles gives us a front seat view of the MMDA's clearing operations.
Owners of vehicles parked along Mendiola Street in Manila were caught by surprise when MMDA personnel arrived to tow illegally parked vehicles. Parking attendants from the local government also came, explaining to the MMDA that portions of the streets were designated as pay parking, but vehicles without parking tickets were still towed.
Hindi po garahe, parking.
Yes, sir.
Parking, okay? Nire-respeto namin yan, pero huwag niyong aabusuhin.
Yes, sir.
Huwag kayong lagay-lagay ng ticket kahit wala yung driver.
Pag pinagbigyan po kita, magiging unfair po naman sa kabila. Kasi ako, sir, talaga hinanap ko pa po kayo.
The MMDA also noticed that bike lanes along Moraita Street were converted into pay parking areas. The agency says while they respect the autonomy of the LGUs, policies such as designating a bike lane as pay parking area is against the national policy. Under the Bayanihan 2 Act, bicycles were declared as additional mode of transportation, and the law has a provision to fund the establishment of bike lane networks.
Nakalagay doon, no parking, bike lane. And then may paid parking. Wala lang sa mga tao na nagpa-park because it's convenient for them. Paano naman yung nagbabike? Diba? So, I do not think na alam ng leadership ng LGU yung pinaggagawa dito, na ang gusto lang talaga is magpa-parking, kumita, and that's it. Hindi nila alam na they're already violating the law.
The MMDA said they initially raised their concern to the LGU and was told that a meeting will be set to iron out the issue. CNN Philippines tried to get the side of the Manila City government but they have yet to respond to our queries.
Hindi need to remove it. It's a national law. Ibig sabihin, parang pag ginagawa mong parkingan, parang sinasabi mo na rin, hindi ako naniniwala dyan.
Aside from areas near schools, the MMDA also cleared roads near the Blooming Street Market. In Antipolo Street, they discovered a car repair shop where they do the repairs on the road. The owner is a barangay official.
Pero yung kagawad na magtatayo ng talyer, gagamitin yung kalsada, ibang usapan yun. Dapat kastiguin na local yung kagawad na yun. Sinasalaula niya yung kalsada eh.
Clearing operations were also done along the streets that are part of Mabuhay Lane. George Cahiles, CNN Philippines.
The Philippine National Police will deploy 23,000 personnel for the resumption of classes. The PNP says cops will be deployed not only in and around schools, but also in transportation hubs and terminals. Officers will be assigned to public areas to ensure minimal health standards are observed. Police have also been participating in the Education Department's Brigada Escuela to gear up for next week. Well, just in time for the opening of classes, transport regulators released the list of routes for non-EDSA buses, jeepneys, and UV Express units. Let's get more on that from our Stanley Cajete. Stanley, what can you tell us?
Pia, the LTFRB will open pre-pandemic non-EDSA routes in time for the opening of classes next week. Under Memorandum Circular 2002-67, the LTFRB will open 33 pre-pandemic bus routes, while MC 2002-68 sets the resumption of operation of traditional PUJs, modernized PUJs, and utility vehicle express, and opens 68 pre-pandemic routes and 32 for UV Express vehicles all over the NCR. Bus operators can start applying for special permits starting tomorrow. LTFRB Chair Cheloy Garafil says these are only special permits for buses and not franchises yet to beat the reopening of classes on Monday. They can issue special permit if they start applying tomorrow. They will also be open on the weekend since Friday is a holiday in Quezon City. Special permit applications will be approved within 1 to 2 days. Routes will be open on Monday. They are also confident that these routes will be enough with the existing units like for city buses that cover about 90% of the city bus routes. Jeepneys, meanwhile, are already covering 70% of total routes. LTFRB also explains that the 133 routes involve about 11,000 vehicles. Most of them will pass universities and near schools in the metro. School buses can also apply for special permits. Meanwhile, LTFRB adds that the number of bus carousels won't increase by Monday. There will be a meeting to propose an additional 100 buses this month or at least early next month. LTFRB also had a meeting with MMDA and still furnishing details on routes that they will open on Monday. They will also talk about the increase of volume on the road next week. On proposed fare hike on buses, LTFRB is still preparing matrix of the proposed fare increase. They are still waiting for position papers of other government agencies. Meanwhile, minimum fare will still be at 11 pesos to 13 pesos and 20% student discount should still be implemented. And that's the latest. Back to you, Pia.
Stanley Cajete there reporting. The Education Department is working to ensure the Colegio de San Lorenzo in Quezon City refunds parents and students following its sudden closure. DepEd is set to meet with school officials tomorrow. An education official notes CDSL only notified DepEd about the closure yesterday. Around 800 students who only found out about it on the day classes were supposed to begin are now scrambling to find a new school.
Sa amin kasi, public school system, we can always ask our public schools to help and saluhin to. Yung problema natin is this is a private school. So it's also likely that they also want to move to another private school. So tayo po talaga, we're really hoping that other private schools would help us.
Some schools have stepped up to assist students, teachers, and non-teaching staff. These include the Quezon City University, UST Angelicum College, and Thames University. The Quezon City Legal Department also released a list of other schools that have offered to accept transferees from CDSL. Up ahead on Newsnight, the government has no plans of lifting the state of public health emergency because of COVID-19, and family, friends, and supporters pay their last respects as Sprint Queen Lydia de Vega is laid to rest. Stay tuned. to CNN Philippines.
RPN DXKP Pagadian. Ang inyong Radyo Ronda. RPN. RPN. Radio Philippines Network. Radio Philippines Network. Live to the world. Pinaagi sa FB page. Karon, mag-download na. Pinaagi sa Google Play o Apple Store, YouTube o Twitter. Alang sa mas kipakuskan ng mga balita, komentaryo, kasayuran o kalingawan. Ang mas kipakuskan ng inyong Radyo Ronda. Member, kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas.
Welcome back to CNN Philippines. President Marcos is not yet lifting the state of public health emergency declared in 2020 because of COVID-19. He says this might stay until the end of the year. The state of public health emergency calls on the public to adhere to the government's mechanisms, especially in utilizing resources to contain the spread of the coronavirus.
Yes, we were just discussing it with Yusek Berhere because maraming mga binibigay sa international medical community. We are looking at amending the law in terms of procurement and all of that in the middle of an emergency. But that will take time. So malamang we will extend it. We will extend it until the end of the year.
No statement yet, though, from the palace on extending the state of calamity set to lapse on September 12th. The declaration lets government agencies and LGUs use their quick response funds against the disease. An expert also highlights the importance of keeping this until the end of the year for vaccine procurement. Infectious diseases specialist Ron Jean Solante says a state of calamity will allow the country to easily secure doses from the World Health Organization and other countries. These include newly developed vaccines against COVID-19 variants.
At this point in time, kailangan pa natin na magdagdag ng supply ng mga bakuna, especially when we are now in the second booster for the vulnerable population and the comorbidities, and of course yung hinihintay natin na Omicron variant booster na mapabilis din ang pagdating dito sa Pilipinas.
Solante adds, based on preliminary data, Omicron-related booster shots are more effective against the original Omicron and subvariants like BA4 and BA5. The United Kingdom recently approved Moderna's vaccine targeting Omicron and the original virus. The Commission on Audit calls out the Health Department over lapses in its COVID-19 response last year. COA said the DOH failed to obligate over 6.6 billion pesos in COVID-19 funds, while more than 23.6 billion pesos were left undisbursed. Auditors also flagged deficiencies in the distribution of COVID-19 items purchased through the procurement service of the Budget Department, worth 185.6 million pesos. Health Officer in charge Maria Rosario Vergere said the agency is now in the process of straightening out these findings.
We have these 60 days to respond appropriately. May paliwanag po kung ano po talaga ang sitwasyon nito pong findings nila. We hope also and we request that other government agencies will try to avoid announcing to the public until po nakakapag-usap with the concerned government agency so as not to give this kind of perception to people na meron na agad na issue kung hindi pa naman ho nakakapagpaliwanag ang DOH.
The DOH was under the leadership of former Secretary Francisco Duque III last year. The Marcos administration is looking to further transform the country into an international investment hub. Our senior correspondent Lois Calderon joins the first investment roadshow organized by Marcos's trade team.
Barely 100 days since he assumed power, President Bongbong Marcos has begun courting foreign investors, pitching the Philippines as a data center hub in Asia-Pacific. Executives from at least 50 foreign companies across the region descended on Manila this week to sit with trade officials. One of them is ICEN, an engineering firm based in Sydney, Australia. It's setting up business operations in Clark.
We're so happy that we're now committed to actually setting up an office here. So I'd say probably in the next 1 to 2 months we'll have an office, we'll have staff. We're talking around 300 in 3 years.
Marcos inherits from former President Duterte an ambitious infrastructure program that could run for decades. That draws investors like ICEN, which is now in talks for a waste energy plant and railway deal valued at $200 million or 11.2 billion pesos. The country's selling point, its highly skilled and English-speaking workforce.
We need people to support us in Australia. It's very difficult to get good engineers in Australia. So that's why we've come to the Philippines to expand our business.
At the height of the pandemic that choked supply chains and amid earlier concerns about the elections, Philippine ecozones earlier saw some foreign locators exiting and setting up operations elsewhere. But as the dust from political uncertainty settles and borders reopen, business returns. PEZA, or the Philippine Economic Zone Authority, now expects up to 7% growth in investments from locators this year. The Board of Investments, meanwhile, wants to top its 1 trillion peso approvals last year.
The data centers, where we are in talks now with at least 4 investors. These investors will be needing 3,200 megawatts in power.
Hyperscalers, mga Google, diba? Google, Microsoft, they have super big data, so they would need really maybe their own data centers.
But I can see that the organisation that you have is attracting people within telecommunications. From South Australia, we have a particular interest in hydrogen and the future of hydrogen.
This week's investment briefing is the first under Marcos' leadership. Trade officials have charted up to 10 roadshows this year. That will take them to as far as Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the US, and Europe. Lois Calderon, CNN Philippines.
Migrant Workers Secretary Toots Ople asks for understanding for the decision to keep the deployment ban on newly hired household workers to Saudi Arabia. This despite calls from some recruitment agencies to lift the ban because the kingdom is opening its market to other Southeast Asian countries like Thailand and Indonesia. Ople says they need to first make sure the rights of household workers will be protected.
Napakabigat sa damdamin tuwing may hihingi ng tulong na naghahasa na namatayan, na pinatay yung OFW, na sinasaktan. Bigyan nyo ng pagkakataon yung gobyerno na tiyakin na mabawasan yung mga ganitong kaso. Meron din naman mga ibang merkado meron din namang pagkakataon na dito makahanap ng trabaho. Pero doon sa talagang naghihintay na magbukas ang Saudi market,
OPLA was involved in efforts to rescue Filipina domestic workers from an abusive Saudi general. This case was one of the grounds for the deployment ban. The Migrant Workers Secretary says a Philippine delegation will fly to Saudi in the coming weeks for bilateral talks on labor issues. Over in Portugal, its labor market now open to some 45,000 foreign workers in the tourism sector, and Filipino workers are welcome to apply. OPLA says the Philippines will soon sign a bilateral labor agreement with the nation. But she tells job seekers to wait for the government's go signal before processing requirements. Straight ahead, family, friends, and fellow athletes of one of the greatest sports figures in the country bid their final farewell to Lydia De Vega. Plus, the San Miguel Beermen and Meralco Bolts clash in Game 7 of the Philippine Cup semifinals to earn the right to face TNT Tropang Giga for the championship round.
DXKP Pagadian, ang inyong Radyo Ronda RPN. RPN, Radio Philippines Network. Radio Philippines Network. Live to the world, pinaagi sa FB page, karon mag-download na. Pinaagi sa Google Play o Apple Store, YouTube o Twitter. Alang sa mas kipakuskan ng mga balita, komentaryo, kasayuran o kalingawan. Ang mas kipakuskan ng inyong Radyo Ronda.
Member, kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas.
Welcome back. Filipinos say their last goodbyes to Asia's fastest woman in the 1980s, honoring her and the huge leap she made for the country in sports. Pauline Versosa has the details of Lydia De Vega's burial in Bulacan.
It's the end of an era for many Filipinos as sports legend Lydia De Vega reached the finish line of her final race. On Wednesday morning, the track queen was laid to rest in her hometown in Maykawayan, Bulacan, exactly a week after she passed away due to stage 4 breast cancer. De Vega, who had been silently battling the disease since 2018, was 57 years old. Before her remains were interred at Maykawayan Memorial Park, a funeral mass was offered at the St. Francis of Assisi Church. In her daughter Stephanie's eulogy, she described how her mother always radiated with positivity, which made her loved by many.
Yeah, that's my mom. Very positive, very happy, masiyahin, but within those smiles, there was also a very loving mother who would do everything for the sake of her family. Our superwoman, Wonder Woman, our very own Miss Universe, superhero, all of the above. Yun yung mom namin. My mother made people come together to support one common goal. To win as a country, to win as a people, and if winning is not possible, to be gracious in defeat and lose together to fight another day as one.
Family, friends, and supporters bid their emotional farewell to Jai. Also mourning the late athlete were her contemporaries in the Gintong Alay Sports program who shared what they will remember most about the sports icon.
Kasama kami sa competition ang mga moment na sabi niya sa akin, galit-galit muna tayo ha. Blaw na kung kami talagang magkalaban o wala na pagkatapos yan. Friends naman. Tapos palagi pa akong napapagkamala na si Lydia, sabi ko si Elma Moros. Kaya palagi ko rin, parang nandito lang siya sa akin palagi.
On behalf of Michael Kian, all the Gintong Alay athletes, all the athletes in the Philippines nationwide, the Philippines has lost a national treasure, but heaven has gained a saint. She was world class in many ways, not just in sports.
The legendary athlete's influence spread far and wide, with an outpour of tributes even among sports leaders in Southeast Asia. For decades, De Vega held the national records in the 100 and 200-meter dash, earning her the title as Asia's fastest woman in the 80s. De Vega's family hopes her legacy will remain as a testament that with hard work, humility, and dedication, any Filipino can do the impossible. Pauline Verzosa, CNN Philippines.
In basketball, Manila is set to host the East Asia Super League's first playoffs next year. The EASL Final Four happens on March 3 with the championship match set on the 5th. The TNT Tropang Giga has secured one of the two slots to represent the country after advancing to the finals of the PBA All-Filipino Conference. We'll find out which other PBA team will join TNT with the San Miguel Beermen and the Meralco Bolts now facing off in their do-or-die semis Game 7. The Beermen have the lead at the end of the first quarter, 26-12. The game is on at the Araneta Coliseum in Quezon City. On to another international tournament. Eliza Valdez and Tots Carlos banner the 14-player Philippine pool for the Asian Volleyball Confederation Cup for women. The lineup is made up of more athletes from the champion team of the Premier Volleyball League Invitational Conference, the Creamline Cool Smashers. The Philippines begins its campaign with a match versus Vietnam on Sunday. And pole vault star EJ Obiena is officially back with the national team. A majority of the Athletics Track and Field Association's board voted to reinstate the Olympic athlete in the roster. His re-inclusion, along with 5 other athletes, takes effect this month. And in entertainment news, in K-pop, Blackpink continues to hype up fans with another striking preview of its next single, Pink Venom. The music video teaser picks up where the last one left off, featuring a new look and a new beat for the girl group.
I bring the pain like
Pink Venom arrives on Friday with the group's forthcoming album, Born Pink, drops in September. And that is it for tonight. Join me again on news.ph at 7 p.m. and on Politics as usual at 8. I'm Pia Ontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
Sexually transmitted infections. With us is Dr. Valiant C. He's an OB gynecologist and infectious disease specialist from the Makati Medical Center and a fellow of the Philippine Obstetrics and Gynecology. Also with us is Dr. Jejuni Rivera. He's an infectious disease specialist and public health specialist from Zamboanga Doctors Hospital and a fellow of the Philippine Society for Microbiology and Infectious Disease. Now, we'll start with Dr. Juni. Doc, what are some of the sexually transmitted infections na prevalent, lalo na dito sa Pilipinas?
Prevalent in the Philippines are gonorrhea, no, yung mga urethritis, ibig sabihin nun. There's an inflammation of the tube where the urine passes that can be caused by many infections like gonorrhea, chlamydia, ureaplasma, syphilis, also very commonly seen. We also have herpes, HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis A is also a sexually transmitted disease because of our practices.
marami talagang STIs ang pwedeng makuha ng mga Filipinos. Now, I'd like to ask Dr. Val naman, do the symptoms vary in each STI?
Since I'm an obstetrician gynecologist, I mostly see female patient and pregnant patient. Majority of them, the first chief complaint is usually pelvic pain, which is masakit yung puson, and the other is usually abnormal vaginal discharge. But from there, you can reassess them and evaluate them kung anong specific na STI yan.
Meron bang STI na walang symptoms na pinapakita? Walang symptoms na mararamdaman?
Actually, there's not such thing as there's no symptom, but the symptom was not, hindi nila napapansin. Then it's apparently, when you tested blood test for STI screen, then nagpa-positive sila. And apparently, they are asymptomatic.
Now, Dr. Juni, do you believe that there is still some form of stigma surrounding STIs? How does this affect people seeing a doctor for their infections or seeking consult, especially for that first time?
There's a lot of stigma around sexually transmitted infections because of our culture. We seem to be not very forgiving about sexually transmitted infections. And so what people do is they keep it to themselves and they come to the doctor when the symptoms are really severe. So like for example, if it is urethritis or gonorrhea, sometimes it will take for male patients to come to the clinic after 3 to 4 weeks. And there's a lot of discharge already coming out from the urethra, from the head of the penis also. And so we are able to treat late sometimes because of stigma. They're afraid that they will be scolded by the doctor, but that's not how it is.
Now, it goes without saying that people who have unprotected sexual intercourse are more likely to contract STIs, but some are at higher risk compared to others. Dr. Juni, are there other risk factors or pre-existing health conditions for STIs?
It's basically behavioral. The risk factors for sexually transmitted infections are because of unprotected sex primarily. And if you have more sexual partners, then you are more likely to have sexually transmitted infections also compared with those who are monogamous or who only have one partner. And if you don't use a condom, mga barrier methods for protecting yourself and others from STIs, then you are at risk for having STIs. There are also other practices of men having sex with men, increase the risks for HIV and many other sexually transmitted infections. And that is why these practices have to be protected.
Dr. Val, when infected with an STI, could you talk about some of the complications that this may lead to if someone is infected? How bad can it get, kumbaga?
If you have an STI and you're pregnant, obviously the STI might infect the unborn children. So for example, in syphilis, it can cause congenital abnormalities of the baby. In HIV, obviously, we know that when the mother is infected with HIV, it's not properly managed. Obviously, the unborn child, when get delivered, might have a chance to become an HIV positive during the first day of her life. Now, when it's non-pregnant, usually in female patient having STI repeatedly, untreated, or even treated, but nauulit, nakakaroon, the chances of infertility is high. Destruction of the organs dun sa mga uterus and ovary na destroy, chronically infected, nasisira. So eventually, you have a long-term problem of unable to get pregnant in the future, or some of the cases, worse, if it gets severely infected, na hindi na kaya ng medical management, you need to surgically remove it. And obviously, when you have a uterus or ovaries removed, you cannot get pregnant in the future.
Dr. Val, how about cancer? Are there STIs that are known to lead or be precursors for cancer?
For the different STI, the more common that is can prone to develop cancer is the HPV infection, the human papilloma virus infection, which is prone to infect the cervix of the patient that can lead to cervical CA. Hence, screening is very important. The other one is the hepatitis B infection. Hepatitis B infection is actually an STI, blood-borne infection that can attack the liver and can cause liver cancer. That's the two more common STI that can lead to cancer. The other naman, it's not that common.
So there you go. So there is also a risk for that. Now, after the break, we'll discuss preventive measures that you can do to make sure you and your partner are safe from STIs. Only here on MedTalk Health Talk. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and welcome back to Med Talk Health Talk on CNN Philippines. Now, there are many ways to ensure that you and your partner are both safe from infection when engaging in sexual activity. Dr. Junie, let's talk about the most accessible form of protection, condoms. Can you discuss the effectivity of these as well as the availability?
Condoms are readily available elsewhere. We have them in the gas stations, stores, no? We have them in groceries. They're everywhere already. We have them in pharmacies as well. So it can prevent most infections. It's a very good barrier method for preventing infections as well as pregnancy in women. And it is very effective. It is highly effective. When we're talking about other sexually transmitted infections such as HIV, the most important factor really is educating people, especially younger people, because at this time, the group that is second most affected among people infected with HIV are the age group 15 to 24 years old.
Speaking of HIV, there is a medicine that is said to reduce one's chance of getting HIV. Is there any, can you talk about this a little bit?
Yes, there's what we call a pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. And that effectively prevents people from having HIV infections as well. If they engage in risky sexual practices, people can have pre-exposure prophylaxis medications, and those are the same medications being taken by people living with HIV that prolong their lives. However, there's also a risk of taking pre-exposure prophylaxis if we are unable to address our behavior, because there are still many other infections that can infect us.
Does something as simple as having proper hygiene help in avoiding some STIs?
Proper hygiene is obviously a basic practice, but in terms of decreasing the risk of STI, I don't think so. It may contribute to decrease somehow, but because it's usually a proper hygiene practice only, not exactly that you're unhygienic, that you develop STI. What can I advise to my patient to prevent that you have performed a high-risk act? You might as well do early screening, and this is part of early prevention.
There are vaccines for some of the viruses that you might contract through sexual intercourse. Dr. Junie, can you identify which STIs already have vaccines?
There's a vaccine for hepatitis B, there's a vaccine for hepatitis A, there's a vaccine for HPV. And the OB gynecologists really give a lot of HPV vaccines to younger women, and I'm very happy with that. It should be part of a national program already to vaccinate all reproductive age women, younger reproductive age women.
How accessible are these vaccines?
It's widely available, but it's somehow expensive. But there are cheaper ones, especially for the HPV, kasi presently we have the 8th strain, the latest strain, that's the more expensive. But if the patient cannot afford, you can still do the previous strain, the 2 strain and the quadrivalent strain, which is much more cheaper. But both of them can protect you from HPV, because in particular, ang habol natin for the vaccine for HPV is not also for the prevention of the STI, but the prevention of the progression to cancer. As I said earlier, that HPV can lead to cervical CA. So giving the vaccine, not exactly for the younger age group, even for the older age group, basta hindi pa siya na vaccine, can help to prevent the development of cervical CA.
How long do they last in providing us with immunity? So na yung ating mga viewers na may mga booster dose lately. Kailangan din mo ng mga booster dose when it comes to the STI vaccines.
Yung hepatitis B vaccine is given in 3 doses, and then you get a booster dose later. But the 3 doses should be already enough. The HPV vaccine is also given as 3 doses, but and as well yung hepatitis A naman. But they're known to have a long-lasting effect. No? And remember that when we are given vaccines, our memory cells in the body will always remember exposure to the vaccine, which is similar to a component of an infecting agent. No? So, maaalala niya yun when the time comes that there is an infection that's coming into the body, and we'll be able to stop that infection. And that stays with us for our lifetime. Although, there is what we call waning immunity pag nagkaroon ng immunosuppression or hihina yung immune system ng tao. But it doesn't happen in general.
Now, Dr. Val, can you walk us through how one can get tested for a sexually transmitted infection?
We usually screen them, usually blood tests. You can screen for serum RPR for syphilis, serum hepatitis B testing, and HIV testing. Now, for the gonorrhea and chlamydia, usually there's no blood test, but usually you do the swab. Ito parang swab test sa COVID, but ito you do the swab in the fluid, in the discharge, that you can send it to test whether the patient is positive chlamydia or gonorrhea. Those are the more common tests that is available in our country.
So if by any chance you become infected with an STI, always connect with your physician first to take necessary actions for these infections. When we return, we'll talk about possible treatment and management options of sexually transmitted infections. So keep it here, only on MedTalk Health Talk. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and welcome back to the show. We have been discussing sexually transmitted infections or STIs and the initial steps to take if by any chance you get infected. Now let's talk about treatment and management for these STIs. Dr. Val, can you walk us through some of them, the ones that you more commonly see in your practice, especially when it comes to women who are infected with STIs?
So when the patient is infected with STI, came to you for screening and you assess them and screen them positive for STI, you immediately treat them. Okay? And the treatment in general for the different STI is quite easy and outright na you just give antibiotic. It may be given in the injection form or oral form, but take it for 1 to 2 weeks, then you reassess it. Most of the time when you reassess it, it's usually resolved. Okay? Cases that are not resolved, most of the time is usually reinfection. So also remind them that while on treatment, practice abstinence. Do not do intercourse yet. Then after treatment, when you screen them na okay na sila, then next you can advise them that they can resume intercourse, but always practice with preventive measures.
Dr. Juni, could you tell us the risks involved for someone who self-medicates, who looks up on Google how to treat their STI? What are some of the risks involved with this?
Most of the important risk factors there would be emergence of resistant microbes because of under-treatment or improper treatment. And we are seeing that already elsewhere in the world, including here in Zamboanga. We used to only give 250 milligrams of ceftriaxone as an injection to people who have gonorrhea. Now, there are some patients who after giving a shot of ceftriaxone, hindi na gumagana, so they come back. They tend to tell us that nothing happened after they were treated, but they seem to have an infection ongoing. And so, what we do now is we also use the European protocol for treatment of gonococcal infections, yung gonorrhea. So we give 1 gram of ceftriaxone along with 2 grams of azithromycin. The azithromycin is also good. It can be given along or alternatively with doxycycline because along with gonorrhea, there may be other co-infections, such as chlamydia or urea plasma. And this can be treated with azithromycin but not ceftriaxone. So there are also orally available antibiotics. I hope nobody sells antibiotics anymore without the doctor's prescription, such as cefixime, and the patients can really also be given alternatively with cefixime. However, there is a risk for resistance to cefixime already. That is why what is recommended now for gonorrhea is really injections.
Are there any STIs where surgical management, surgical procedures is an option for that? Or can most STIs be treated medically?
Most STI in general can be treated medically. Given proper antibiotic, proper dose, and proper follow-up, completion of the dose, we can treat it. Now, for STI for surgical approach, usually the only one that is common, it's the genital warts, okay? That's caused by human papilloma virus. Usually genital warts, we can treat it medically, but most of the time, you need to do surgical removal in the term of electrocautery to eradicate those lesions because those are bothering. Other than that, most of the time, they can manage medically.
Thank you so much, Dr. Valiant C. and Dr. Juni Rivera for being with us today. Madami talaga tayong natutunan, especially when it comes to STIs. So thank you for sharing your expertise. And to our viewers, remember that health professionals are here to help you when you are dealing with STIs. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and thank you for watching MedTalk Health Talk. We'll see you again next time.